We are live from Montreal and Taiwan.
Hi everyone. Yet one more Facebook Live with Joey, Tetsu, and starting to become a regular at our Facebook Live. Nicolas.
Hello, yes. Almost regular. I mean, we have different regulars.
Yeah, that's it. We have an extended meeting. One of the persons, the person that's supposed to be joining us shortly is Rony Gao, who's going to be presenting with us at Langfest. Rony is a professional translator, I guess. Fairly good one. He has a lot of information. I was looking at his LinkedIn profile. Experienced conference interpreter, cross-cultural consultant. What he's not teaching or interpreting, Rony is also passionately involved in cultural and educational projects in both Asia and North America.
And here's the guy. We have Rony.
All right.
Hey, Rony.
Hi, Rony.
We were just talking about you.
Welcome, Rony. I was going over your pedigree while we were getting ready. So as I was saying, Rony is a professional translator, but he's also a conference interpreter, cross-cultural consultant, educational entrepreneur. You have been involved in educational projects both in Asia and North America. You've been a volunteer English teacher in remote regions of Thailand. You were a youth mentor at the Learning Disability Association of Toronto District in Toronto. And this I thought was actually very interesting. You contributed to the widely praised book Cleverland's Secrets Behind the Success of the World's Education Superpowers.
Wow.
Which is probably North America, not North America, which was named Book of the Year by The Economist in 2016. So either way, we're very happy that you're with us, Rony. We're looking forward to having you with us this summer at Langfest. Have you ever participated in those types of events before, polyglot language gatherings?
Well, thank you, Joey. I have not. Langfest has always been something I wanted to go to. I've been your fan since it was created. And this year I'm just very thrilled to know that I was invited as a speaker to join you guys in Montreal. Are you all in Montreal?
Well, right now,
you're all based in
I'm in Montreal.
Joey and Nicolas are in Montreal. The left side, the right side is other parts of the world. So we have Nicolas and Joey in Montreal, and we have Tetsu that's in Taiwan right now, I think.
Yes, you think right.
Yes. Rony is in Toronto. Is that correct?
I am. Yes.
Okay,
indeed.
cool. So we're broadcasting from 3 parts of the world today, but through the wonders of technology, we all get together in one place. Our Facebook Lives and also Langfest in the summer, where we bring people from all around the world, sometimes as far away as Australia, that have come to our event. So it's a pretty fun gathering where I think you're going to enjoy the experience, Rony. The problem is once you go, after that, you're going to want to go to all of them.
I'm sure I will. Are we on air? So
Yeah,
we are.
Yes, we are.
We are.
Absolutely.
Wow.
This is live.
This is live, yeah.
Hello world then.
Exactly.
I don't know how many people are watching.
Okay.
I guess one of the I don't know if Joey, you're the moderator. If you allow me to,
Absolutely. Go ahead. I know Tetsu has a few
I mean,
questions that he wanted to ask Rony also.
talk a little bit about what you're going to tell us about at Langfest. So you're a conference interpreter. So and there's a twist to your talk that you're not only talking about conference interpreting, but also what will happen to the job perhaps in the near future, due to the advent of things such as machine translation and the like. So are you going to be telling us about the demise of your own profession? Is that what you're going to be telling us about? Maybe so. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came to conference interpreting and why you think the topic of interpretation and of the new technologies that will enter the field. Why is that something that's really of interest to you?
Sure. I would say I have two motifs of why I wanted to talk about this. Well, first of all, as a conference interpreter, I realized there are many myths and misconceptions that the curious public have about conference interpreting, because in all fairness, it is a very mysterious and less known profession. We work in a booth at conferences, so we don't really interact with people who purchased our service or people that are using our service as much as you would expect in a kind of a service-oriented profession. So I wanted to kind of come out of the dark room and give a presentation about actually what we do, what we think of what we do, and kind of how we do it. So that's motif number one. Motif number two is I've spoken to similar audiences before that are not in the language profession, people that are not language professionals or translators and interpreters. And I've always had really thought-provoking interactions with my audience. The kind of questions and comments I get is always very refreshing to me. They make me rethink the way I think of what we do as well. So I've always thoroughly enjoyed that kind of discussion and this kind of conversation. And I'm absolutely sure that at Langfest, given that everyone there is already a language nerd, let me say, I'm sure that I'm going to take away as much as everyone else takes away from my presentation. Hopefully they'll take away something interesting from my presentation.
Great. I think they will. And anyways, this is a topic that's of interest to me as well, because one of the things I do at Langfest is to manage the translation team, so we can have bilingual communication. So it's not conference interpretation, and unfortunately we won't have conference interpreters at Langfest, but we will have talks in both languages. And another aspect that's of interest to me as well is that I'm interested in lingua francas and how to. In the end, it's a little bit what you do. It's what communicating across the language barrier. And I speak the constructed language Esperanto, and and that's also something that I feel is sort of part of this interest. How do you get across the language barrier? There's different ways to do that. And a couple of weeks ago, we did a live with Benny Lewis. Maybe you know him. He's one of the best known. Yeah, you do. Polyglots in this community. He's very into technology, and he showcased a system that that had voice recognition. Plus, it was Microsoft system. I don't remember what it's called. Plus, instantaneous machine translation on the side. So what he had was basically a machine translation running in real time, and it wasn't perfect, but I was surprised, at how good things had become, in recent years. You could listen to what he was saying, and okay, some sentences don't make sense, but you could still get the idea. So, and I know that conference interpreters are not perfect themselves. So how close are we to, getting to the same level as accurateness that a human conference interpreter would have? What's your assessment on that?
Well, Nicola, you just asked the question that propelled myself to want to research on this topic and want to present. So you want to know an answer? Come to my talk. Well, yes. So I like the framework that you're using here. Human interpreters are not perfect anyway, and the machines are rapidly catching up. That's just the reality that we live in. Perhaps in 20 30 years, we will be surpassed by machines. So that is a very real possibility. And I don't deny that this possibility exists. But then to touch upon the kind of machine, how machine works, a simple answer is that they are getting very close to a usable level. You can argue that they are already highly usable in many scenarios. For example, if you're traveling, you don't speak the language of the local country. What you do is you can rely on the machine, and it does very much of the job. It does maybe 75, 80% of the job, asking for prices, asking for direction, or even hold a basic conversation. Perhaps a relatively better known example is Google earbuds, because Google has a very powerful service that handles translation between many different languages. So Google Translate, who doesn't love Google Translate? Even I use Google Translate a lot to help with my own work of interpretation and translation. But then the question is that kind of usable a good standard to use in talking about, oh, human interpreters will lose your jobs because machines will do it? Well, my answer is no, because the kind of conversation we have in a local market is fundamentally different from the kind of conversation or the kind of speech that we have to interpret in a conference setting. In a conference setting, there's more nuance to it. There's more background information that the human interpreter would need to understand before saying something. Right now, the one big challenge that machines have, these AI-powered machines, is that they don't think. They don't process the information as well as the intention behind the information the way we do. I will give more examples during my presentation about what I mean, but there's definitely, as all of you must agree, there's a cultural element to it as well. A lot of times, I think as conference interpreters, we are not just translating words as they are. We are translating the message. We're translating the culture.
Even in text. Even in text, it's true. Yeah, I agree.
Even in what?
Even in text, even if you're translating text, it's the same. It's maybe not as intense as in person, but you're always translating a message and have to adapt a lot of the ways people say things. And I mean, I run into that kind of issues every day. Doing translations for Langfest, or that I do I'm not a translator by profession, though. I did do I was a proofreader for a few years. But I've always done translations professionally and as part of my volunteer work because it's one of my skills. So it's very much agree.
I think all of us in our daily jobs, I'm not in my profession is not languages. However, as a project manager, I have to constantly translate between French and English. Tetsu probably has to do it also for Japanese and Mandarin and English. And you can't do word for word. Sometimes you take a text, you have to translate an email and submit it to all the others and interpret it for them in a way that they're going to be able to understand it. But you have to look at the context, you have to look at different things. And I think what you're saying is very true. AI is making a lot of progress. However, there's still a need for people like us that can speak the different languages. Your team this summer that you're going to be presenting is very interesting. I think you should probably sync up with Benny when you're there because he's doing a lot of studies on that topic, and he'd probably be interested in talking with you about that in particular.
Wonderful.
So I know you had a couple of questions that you wanted to ask him specifically about the about his presentation.
Well, yeah. Well, I think you already touched upon it. Well, the Google Pixel earbuds, I guess.
Yes.
And I was going to ask what you think at the current time is really one of the best tools that are out there for this type of automatic translation. Maybe it's Google Translate. I don't know if there's other software that you prefer or that you think has tremendous potential. You know, as an expert, what do you think the industry is looking at the current time in this snapshot of the current time?
Well, I think one thing I'll say first is that there has not been one tool that is built specifically for simultaneous translation yet. There are several tools for each stage of what needs to be done. Stage 1 is speech recognition. Stage 2 is text to text between two languages, such as Google Translate. And stage 3 is speech synthesis, to basically read out the translated text back to our ears. I would argue that stage 3 is unnecessary in many ways, right? Because when we're watching foreign language movies, we don't necessarily prefer hearing the dubbed version. We prefer hearing the original and seeing the subtitles. So
speech synthesis works very well as well. So it's it's already solved.
Exactly, it's 100%.
You don't need it, but it's solved.
Exactly, good point. So, and then if we zoom into the first 2 stages, it turns out that the best tools for speech recognition is focused only on speech recognition. Translation is not necessarily something on their mind. And the best tools out there for translation is mostly focused on text-to-text translation, right? Such as Google. Yeah. I'm going to give a personal answer to your question, Tetsu, because the only 2 languages that I speak fluently are Mandarin, Chinese, and English. So when I use Mandarin, I use a input method called iFlyTech, or 讯飞 in Chinese. I have it installed on my smartphone. Whenever I use a texting service like WeChat, for example, I don't need to really type as much as I used to. I just turn on the speech recognition software called iFlyTech. I speak in a even pace, in a relatively standard kind of Mandarin accent, and it gets almost 80-90% of what I'm saying. Wow. And what's really scary, I've had many interesting debates about how usable they are and how usable they would be in the future. And here's one very interesting way to look at it. Every time I say noon, okay, 中午, which is the Chinese word for noon, my phone, the software recognizes Friday, 周五, because they sound very similar. They have the same tone. But then what I realized was, hey, this is not so much of the machine to blame, because those are 2 confusing sounds. What I will do is, if I want to say Friday, I'll choose another word, 星期五, instead of 周五. Right? They both mean Friday in Chinese, and they both, 星期五 is easier to recognize because it has 3 syllables. So I say to my friends, the machine isn't perfect, but I find myself adapting to it as opposed to it adapting to myself. And that's kind of a very new thing to us, users of tech, because in the past we have an assumption that it's the technology that needs to adapt to our needs. But if all I need to change is to use a different word for Friday and make sure that it is properly picked up, I will. So in the future, I expect to see more and more of this kind of human adaptation made to serve the machine, because it helps the machine do a better job recognizing what we're saying, and it saves us from having to type on our fingers. Why not? So if this is true, then we are heading to a very interesting direction, aren't we?
We're improving the system ourselves, but in the end, I guess it's not very different from saying, you're going from the handwritten word with the pen to typing. It's like what you're doing is adapting to the tool that you have, and I guess it's that's just another example of something that's been happening
Right.
for years, right? Because you do different to get the same result. I was even just driving a car versus riding a bike. You know, you want to get to from point A to point B. You're getting the same result, but you're doing entirely different things with your body and how you control it. One aspect that I want to maybe to go back to is that you mentioned the marketplace as a good example where you know, communication. Oh, you've
No,
gone
I'm
dark.
still here. I'm still here.
Okay,
Right.
a good
Lose
example
power.
as a situation where machine translation could work, and conference
Yes.
interpretation as one where human interpreters would be more beneficial. But I always thought of it as almost the other way around, in the sense that when you're doing when you're giving a conference or you're giving a speech, you're typically using language that's more formal, that's maybe better recognizable,
Right.
while when you're talking to someone, be it at the market, at home, or whatever, you're being informal in the language that you use, and you're also giving it a lot of context through your body language. So, which you would also, as if you were to speak in front of an audience, but not as much. Like you would listen to the conference, not looking at the person. You still get 99% of the information that was passed on. While if I was listening to a conversation between friends and maybe people who have vision problems are better at it than I would, but I would feel that I'd be missing part of the context, not looking at them, not being there. So it's like it's something that in my mind sort of contradicts what you were saying.
Yes. Yes. I think the answer to this question is how high of a stake is at the meeting. Because yes, as you said, a lot of times the conference speeches and discussions are quite predictable, right? They're in a controlled environment. The sound quality is usually good, and the kind of language they use is it's just one type of. It's only one style, and the vocabulary, you can argue, is also limited. But because the stake is very high, mistakes are not going to be tolerated. An example being, this week we've been talking about Trump's meeting with Putin, and some Democrats in the Congress are asking the interpreter at the meeting to testify in court, because he was virtually the only other American who was at the meeting. Now, my question is, again, I'm not taking a political stance by bringing this up, but my question is, can we imagine a world where Trump meets Putin without a human interpreter? Would diplomats or political leaders be comfortable talking through a machine with one another? The answer is no. It's simply not going to happen, because of the way we are very much used to relying on this kind of human interaction, relying on this human ear and human brain to process the message for us. So that's the kind of meeting that machines will never be doing. But then instead, in the market, for example, I'm just chatting with a local. I wanted to know how much something is. The stake is much lower. Right? Even if there's a mistake, then so what, right? Chances are I'll still figure out where the restroom is eventually, or how much something, because they wouldn't sell it. So that's kind of my response to your comment, Nicolas.
It's very interesting.
Thank you.
And
That's an interesting response.
Rony. It's very true.
I do feel that, anyways, what we're going to get if machine translation becomes very good, there's going to be some sort of a separation of domains, right? I mean, some domains, like you said, are going to be always human. Even text translation, when you need it to be accurate, it has to be at least proofread.
Right.
At the very least, it needs to be so. And so maybe, it's a separation by stakes, I guess, that will make
exactly.
I don't think also that machine translation will make language learning redundant, because there's direct interaction and direct information that you can get, but it's all a matter of context. Sometimes it's appropriate to speak a common language, and in some other contexts, it might be better to speak through an interpreter, through a machine, or what have you. But I think all these things will, complement each other and sort of operate in different domains. That's the way I've always felt it. That that new tools sort of typically they replace the older tools in some aspects, but it's hard to replace everything that you were doing with a single tool. It's hard to get 100% coverage of everything.
Right, absolutely. I agree with you. So let me put it this way. If I'm going to a foreign country for a meeting, then I'm sure you all agree that the best way for me to interact is if I speak the local language, or if we share a common language that we both speak fluently, such as English. So no doubt about that, because it's more direct, it's more complete, it's more relatable. Okay, it just makes things a lot more efficient. It makes the whole process more enjoyable. But then, given that we don't speak a common language, we don't share a lingua franca that we can use, then now what's our next best option? Is it using a machine to translate, or is it hiring a person to translate for us? Then in this dynamic, one thing to always keep in mind is that interpreters, especially the professional type of interpreting service, is very expensive. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they are hard to find. Business people don't have the time, and a lot of times they don't bother spending the money on professional interpreters. And that means what? That means that they would have to make a choice between them speaking their broken English versus using a machine so they can speak their mother tongue. In that case, if the machine happens to do a better job than their broken English, the machine finds a very viable market, right? So the bar is not as high as you might think for machines to play a role. The bar is not to replace human interpreters. Instead, the bar is if the machine translation beats the quality of the two persons speaking a broken common language, then bang, you can use it. So that's why I'm very much optimistic about the future of machine translation. I think there are many new areas and new scenarios that we haven't explored because bandwidth doesn't support it, because we haven't had the softwares and hardwares to support the kind of interaction through a machine. But down the road, I think there will be more.
So if I resume your thinking, which I think I'm fully aligned, is a matter of quality, price, and speed. Joey probably can relate to this as a project manager. These are the triple constraints that we always have to work with. And as the quality of translation goes up and the price goes down, somewhere along the way it's going to debalance, I guess, that the human expertise to a certain degree. It's a gradual thing happening, obviously.
To find its market, essentially, just by moving to the spot, I guess, where it's.
So we're running short on time. If we could maybe do one more question that I have for you, what do you see as a good synergy, a good symbiosis between the machines and the interpreters, rather than thinking one will eliminate or exclude the other? How do you think they can really work together? How can professional interpreters or translators really benefit from this new technology coming up and take full advantage of that to heighten their own work?
Wonderful question. Thank you, Tetsu. Because one of the main ideas that I want people to walk away from my talk is that humans, interpreters, and machine interpreters should not be rivals.
There you go.
They should absolutely pursue synergy, as you said. Mm-hmm. And I see great potential in that area. I will give an answer that's focused on simultaneous interpretation, because the non-simultaneous, the more casual kind of what we call consecutive or liaison interpretation is kind of a different topic. But in simultaneous interpretation, I think down the road, I would very much like to see a speech recognition tool used to transcribe a speech, to transcribe someone's remarks at a meeting in real time, and have the text displayed on a screen in front of me. Okay, assuming
okay, so that already was what Benny was showing us last time.
Exactly.
So I guess the technology is there. Whether it's up to par is a different question, but definitely it's there already.
You will be surprised at how much resistance that kind of technology has been met by the agencies, by the parties that use interpretation. On an institutional level, for example, the United Nations is not using it. The European Union is not using it. The Parliament Hill in Ottawa is not using it. They are still very much 100% reliant on human ears picking up the message and human mouth speaking it. So institutionally, there's a long way to go for that type of technology to become mainstream. But I think this is also a very interesting time because the private market is doing things a lot more quickly than the institutional employers or institutional users of conference interpreting. One may argue that this is heading to a dangerous direction because then you have the kind of old school thoughts, old school people doing it the 20th century way, and then there will be a bunch of new people very much rallying behind the 21st century way. I don't know if the two type of interpretation will diverge 10 years from now. Perhaps they will. And then in that case, if you're trained to be an institutional interpreter, then you just don't use the machine. Just drop the idea of machine being part of it. And then if you are a freelance interpreter like myself, then you would very much embrace machines being part of it, especially if machines become a lot cheaper to use down the road.
I guess it's a tool that makes your job easier.
Exactly. So why not?
So a couple more minutes to go. I wanted to reiterate once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to talk with us today on our Facebook Live. We're looking very forward to having you in Montreal for Langfest, which will take place from August 21st to 26th. The venue, it has two parts. The 3 first days, you can play tourist. If you've never come to Montreal, it's your opportunity to come and get to visit all the sites. And the 3 last days, 24th to the 26th, are the actual conference portion of the Langfest, which will take place at Concordia University. We have a picnic on the last day, a gala dinner on the Saturday. There's lots and lots of activities that are going to happen. For those that are watching us that haven't registered yet, well, you should. You can get to see all of us. And Rony, whose topic is going to be very, very interesting. Do we know, sorry, but do we know on what day he's presenting? Is it on a Saturday or Sunday?
Ronny's presenting on the Saturday. You're
presenting on the Saturday. So Rony will be presenting on Saturday, and Saturday's agenda is pretty full. We're going to have workshops, conferences, all kinds of things happening. Sunday's pretty full too. Friday's a little bit more of a lazy initiation to the event, although we're starting to cram in a lot of stuff. But a lot of people can only make it on the weekends. So most of the stuff is on Saturday, Sunday. However, if you're there on Friday, lots of really interesting things happening. We have workshop on interpretation and accents. We're going to have the kickoff of the event, the official launch. On the Thursday, we have a get-together.
We'll be having a fun game too, a language game. So people should look forward to that.
Yeah, the language games on the Friday, which is brought to us by one of our sponsors, UTalk. It all starts on the Tuesday. So if you're there on the Tuesday, you can be with us from the beginning We usually kick it off with something that you have in Toronto now too. Our friends from Mundo Lingo. And it's usually a fun event. If you've never been to those types of events, you know, you sort of put a flag for every country, every language that you speak, and people walk up to you and start exchanging conversations and things of the sort. It's fun. When are you planning to come down, Ronnie?
I think I can make it there on Friday.
On the Friday? So you'll be there for the beginning of the official beginning of the conference at Concordia University. It's a beautiful venue. If you've never been, it's a really nice place. We're very fortunate to have that space for our event. So about 30 days to go. We're July 20th, and this is starts on August 21st. So countdown is on.
Yes, counting down.
Time passes by very fast. So 4 more Facebook Lives, and I guess then Langfest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So thank you very much for
Thank you. Looking forward to meeting you.
joining us, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.